Welcome to our presentation titled Advancing Equity in Elementary Classroom Discussions. We're honored to be presenting at the 2020 virtual conference of the Minnesota Center for Reading Research. Today's presentation focuses on the work of leading class discussions and is based on our work with Deborah Ball and her Teaching Works colleagues at the University of Michigan. Our group has been involved with their organization over the past year and will continue as Teaching Works Fellows in the next school year. However, we are all literacy professors here in Minnesota. We'd like to start by giving you a brief outline of our presentation. We'll begin with some introductions, after which we'll show you the Teaching Works frameworks that were developed for use in planning group discussions. After that, we'll do a simulation of a group discussion and you'll have the chance to familiarize yourself with the text if you're not already familiar with it. After viewing the group discussion, you'll be led through the observation protocol document to reflect on the elements of leading a group discussion that were evidenced in the simulation. Finally, you'll hear from the person who played the role of teacher in the video as she demonstrates choices that she made in her instruction. Note that she's demonstrating throughout the video what might be typical of a novice teacher leading a group discussion, or someone for whom leading a group discussion is a relatively new skill. My name is Liz Fogarty, and I will be a professor at the University of St. Thomas coming this fall.
My name is Susie Kabak, and I am a professor at St. Catherine University.
My name is Amy Smith, and I am a professor at the University of St. Thomas and department chair.
My name is Christy Bergeson, and I'm a professor at St. Cloud State University.
My name is Kate Kelly, and I am a professor at St. Catherine University. We are a group of teacher educators who came together as part of a fellowship offered through Teaching Works at the University of Michigan. Through our fellowship, we were able to investigate high leverage practices that advance equity through the combination of focusing on content, pedagogy, and equity. And specifically, we looked at leading large group discussions. And it is that work that we are going to focus on through our presentation today.
In this section of the video, I'd like to introduce you to the process that Teaching Works has developed to frame the work of leading a group discussion. In Teaching Works, they call these frameworks decompositions. So what you're looking at on the screen right now is the decomposition that they've developed of leading a group discussion. So you can see in the yellow band that goes across the top of the screen, there is a phase that's about discussion enabling, and that's the preparation that happens before the discussion starts. And then there's discussion leading. And within discussion leading, there's three parts: framing the discussion, orchestrating the discussion, and then recording and representing key content. You can see at the very bottom that there are two major goals for any discussion that's led: maintaining a focus on the instructional point and seeing and disrupting patterns that reproduce inequity. In the video, we're going to focus on three of these areas. We'll be focusing on the preparation, the framing, and the orchestration that happens. So looking at the first section, in the preparation section, the teacher will identify the content point of the discussion. She'll then select a discussable task or text. Then she'll anticipate some student thinking and really sense what they might want to bring up or discuss in the discussion. There may be some setting up of independent or small group work with a task or a text before they begin. And finally, some monitoring of student work. All of that happens in anticipation of the work of a discussion. Moving into the discussion leading phase, there's framing that takes place. The teacher must launch the discussion by telling students the goals of the discussion, activating prior knowledge if it's necessary, posing an open-ended question or issue related to the content point, moving into reviewing norms for discussion, and finally, efficiently engaging students in the discussion. All of that framing is really important so that a teacher can make sure that he or she is setting the stage for the orchestration of a good and strong discussion. In our simulation, you're going to see the teacher do some framing by setting a good question to begin with, an open-ended question, something that she's thought about and developed based on the content point that she's trying to use in this work. Finally, in our simulation, you're also going to see the orchestration. So you're going to see the simulated students, in this case, the presenters of this session. During the orchestration, the important points of teaching are encouraging and allowing all students to participate, eliciting multiple ideas, probing students' thinking to clarify and expand student ideas, orienting students to the contributions of others, ensuring that students are attending, listening, and responding to the ideas of others, supporting students in connecting ideas, making strategic contributions, and then using moves such as redirecting, revoicing, and highlighting to keep the discussion on track. So you'll see the teacher work on doing those things in our simulated discussion. Please note that the teacher is acting as if she is a novice in this task in leading a group discussion, or as if she is new to the work of leading a group discussion.
We'd like to give you an opportunity to pause to consider the following question. How might the practice of leading a group discussion based on a read aloud perpetuate or disrupt patterns of inequity? Please write down some responses to this question to help prime the pump before continuing the presentation. Please pause your video and go to the following site to open the observation protocol document. In just a minute, we're going to show you a video of a whole group discussion, and this observation protocol document will allow you to record some of your own thinking as you're watching the video. I'd like to introduce you to some of the elements that we'll be looking at in a whole group discussion by sharing with you this observation discussion tool. So on in the video that we're going to watch in just a minute, I'd like you to be paying attention to examples of when the teacher is eliciting multiple responses from students. And on the left side of this observation discussion protocol, you'll see some examples of what that might look like. Also, pay attention to when the teacher is probing students' thinking. And again, here are some examples of what that might look like or sound like. Also pay attention to how the teacher is orienting students to the contribution of peers. And pay attention to how the teacher is encouraging students to make strategic contributions to the discussion. And throughout the video, please consider ways that this teacher is attending to diversity and equity through this whole group discussion. And take notes in this observation discussion tool, and then after the video, we will come back and share with you some of the things that we were thinking about with this discussion. If you want to look at some more examples of what this might sound like when the teacher is orchestrating discussion for these various moves, please feel free to view the second part of this document.
The simulated group discussion is based on a reading of the book Last Stop on Market Street. So if you're not familiar with the text, you can pause this video and watch or listen to the read aloud at the following YouTube link.
When he spotted their familiar faces in the window, he said, I'm glad we came. He thought his Nana might laugh her deep laugh, but she didn't. She patted him on the head and told him, "Me too, CJ. Now come on." Thank you for your good listening during the read aloud. Now we are going to share our ideas and listen to others during our discussion about this book. Can you remind me how we show we are listening when someone else is talking?
We're quiet.
That's one way we show we're listening. We are quiet. Where do we look when someone else is talking?
We look at them.
We look at the person who is talking. That's right. We remember how to do our best listening, and I know we are ready to do our best listening and sharing for our discussion today about Last Stop on Market Street. At the start of reading this book, I asked you to think about our big question we wrote on the board. What does CJ learn throughout the book? I want you to think in your heads about your answer and use your finger to show how many things you have to share about the big question. If you have one thing CJ learns, show me one figure. If you have two things CJ learns, show me two fingers.
CJ learned about the people on the bus.
We are just thinking in our heads right now, Amy. I want everyone to think in their heads about their own ideas before we share them out loud. Okay, I'm seeing some fingers. So now let's share our ideas. Amy, you had something to share.
Yeah, I wanted to share that CJ learned.
Okay, can you give me an example about what he learned about the people on the bus?
He learned that one man is blind and one man played a song.
So CJ learned some things about the other people riding the bus. What do the rest of you think about that?
He learned to share because he gave his coin from Mr. Dennis to the man after he sang his song.
Is there someone who can comment on that or add on to that?
I want to share that I feel bad for people who live in CJ's neighborhood, like the people on the bus. We should help them.
Can you tell me more about why you feel bad?
The man who can't see things differently because nobody fixed his eyes.
Yeah, I agree with Susie. And the neighborhood is dirty because no one helps clean up.
And at the soup kitchen, the people are homeless and don't have food when CJ and Nana leave.
There are a lot of people who experience really hard things, and there are lots of inequities in the world. When you say you want to help them, can you think of anything you could do, like what CJ and Nana are doing?
I don't know. I could work at a soup kitchen too.
My family gives food to a food shelf sometimes when we can.
Those are good examples of ways to help. Sometimes we might be the ones who can help, and sometimes we might need the help. So do any of you have other ideas about what CJ learns throughout the book?
Well, CJ is mad because Nana keeps trying to make him learn to feel good about his neighborhood, but he lives in a bad neighborhood.
Can you tell me what you read in the book that helps you think that CJ is mad about living in his neighborhood?
It's a bad neighborhood. When he tries to tell Nana about something bad, she tries to make him think it's actually good. Like that they don't have a car, and Nana said it's better to ride the bus anyway, but it's better to have a car.
Okay, so CJ feels bad about not having a car, and Nana tries to make him feel better.
And they don't have other things like his friends have, and they have to go and do stuff after church instead of going home.
And that makes CJ mad?
Yeah.
Did CJ change at all in the book? Did he stay mad the whole book?
Well, he liked the song on the bus.
I agree. I'd like to add that at the end that he was glad he came to the kitchen.
But he still lives in a bad neighborhood.
Well, lots of people ride the bus in my neighborhood, but it's not bad.
So, if we think about what CJ learned in the book, can you think of other things that CJ learned? Christy, can you share what you remember about what CJ learned?
He learned that it feels good to help people.
Can you give me an example of what you read in the book to show you that he learned that?
Well, he learned that when he gave out food at the soup kitchen, he said he was glad he went after all.
He did say that, even though in the beginning of the book he didn't want to go. So, in our discussion, we talked about what CJ learned. He learned about the people on the bus, he learned about a way to help people, and he learned that helping people feels good. We talked about ways that you can help people in your neighborhood too, if you can. This is something that we can keep thinking about and come back to. Thank you for your good listening and sharing.
As we consider the group discussion that you just viewed of Last Stop on Market Street, you might like to refer to your notes on the observation protocol. Next, we'll break down some of what we noticed, including both solid teacher moves and some missed opportunities. Eliciting multiple ideas from multiple students. The teacher provides several opportunities for students to generate ideas before the discussion begins. She asks the big questions, allows for think time, and asks for students to hold up fingers representing ideas. This allows students to identify their own multiple ideas before sharing. Throughout the discussion, multiple students are called upon to share ideas. The teacher elicits multiple responses by asking questions such as, who else has an idea? Would someone like to comment on that? Probe students to clarify thinking and expand ideas. The teacher skillfully models probing student thinking with several prompts and questions such as, give me an example of what CJ learned on the bus. And she asks for detail. Can you tell me more about that? A strong example is provided when the teacher asks, what do the rest of you think about that? This nuanced version of tell me more orients students to an idea that needs further discussion. So CJ learned things about people on the bus. What else did he learn? Orienting students toward each other. In the exchange about what CJ learns in the book, the teacher orients students to one another asking, is there someone else who can comment on or add to that? This validates the idea shared and expands its value by having students consider the idea and elaborate, making strategic contributions. The teacher uses moves of revoicing and redirecting frequently. Midway through the discussion, the teacher summarizes the discussion about what CJ learns. She also then supports student ideas by strategically shifting the discussion. She says, people experience hard things. Can you think of a way to help? This expands on what CJ might learn and includes what the participants in the discussion might also be learning. This is a category that novice teachers may struggle with, and the simulation and discussion actually planned for that to give an example of ways in which attending to diversity and equity can be a complicated matter. This discussion centered on a good and worthy text with a discussion prompt that could potentially address issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice. A major missed opportunity for this teacher involved the idea shared about a bad neighborhood. When the student attaches a judgment to something that isn't a direct inference from the book by calling it a bad neighborhood, the teacher could use this opportunity to address that statement. The student opens a discussion thread about CJ being mad that he lives in his neighborhood, feeling bad about having no car, having to work in the soup kitchen, and he describes the neighborhood as bad and dirty. The teacher doesn't follow up on what makes this a bad neighborhood. And so when another student comments, lots of people ride the bus in my neighborhood and it isn't bad, the teacher moves right on without recognizing or upholding this student's opinion. It's a missed opportunity to address the questions that could disrupt the perception of what a bad neighborhood is. Perhaps the teacher could have asked further probing questions to elicit greater range of responses. or to help people define what a bad neighborhood meant to them. Lots of people ride the bus in my neighborhood and it isn't bad. Skipping that ignores the student's experience and also allows a perception of what a bad neighborhood is to persist in the discussion. So this missed opportunity about why the neighborhood might be bad, or maybe why is this neighborhood under-resourced, could have interrupted or disrupted some patterns of thinking that students held about what it meant to live in a bad neighborhood. Next, you'll have an opportunity to hear the teacher reflect upon her experience of planning and leading this group discussion, as well as some of the solid teacher moves and the missed opportunities in attending to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thanks for debriefing with us, Kate, to give us a window into the way you think about planning for an equitable discussion via read aloud. So let's start with a big question. What are some of the factors that guide your thinking as you plan a discussion based on a read aloud, regardless of the book, knowing that advancing equity is a primary goal?
Thanks, Susie. So there are two big things that I think about as I'm planning a discussion. One is choosing a good and worthy text, a text that is diverse, that offers windows and mirrors for students, that is a text that will provide opportunities for students to both extend their thinking and relate to the characters. And so Last Stop on Market Street offered a lot of those things as I was planning this particular discussion. And then also I think about centering on the content focus for the discussion. In this case, it was a question about thinking about the character of CJ and what he learns. But in general, it's thinking about a open-ended question that offers students opportunities to share how they think about the characters or the setting or the themes throughout the text, that they can provide examples from the text so that it's a text-based question, but it's open-ended as an opportunity to focus on that content.
Great. I think, yeah, that was really clear. That idea of picking a diverse text that's good and worthy, especially in your context, and then focusing on content goals. And it was clear that your students had done some pre-read aloud thinking about a big idea in Last Stop on Market Street. And you just said that that's part of what you consider in your content goal. So can you tell us about your intentions for what you have students doing in the pre-read aloud?
So what I want to do for during a pre-read aloud, so any questions that I have students think about in advance of reading is, I want them to make personal connections to the text, but also set them up to be successful in the post-reading discussion. And so in this case, I imagined that before this full read aloud, I would have prompted students to think about questions such as, what does it mean to learn something? Think about a time you learned something. How do you know you learned it? So I might have had them thinking about learning. I might have also asked questions about characters who change throughout a book, or events that might, or something that might happen that would cause a character to change. And so I would have wanted students to be both connecting to the text and provided with some relevance, but also to set them up to be successful in the reading discussion so that they would have some ideas heading into that post-reading discussion based on what we talked about ahead of time, and then as they were thinking through the book, keeping that content focus throughout the read aloud.
Okay, I'm going to drill down a little bit right there and ask you, given those intentions, the idea of helping students make personal connections before you start the read aloud, and positioning everyone to be able to contribute something with a question like, what does it mean to learn something? So if we had been privy to that pre-read aloud discussion, can you think of one thing a student might have said that would have told you your intentions were being met around connections or inviting in?
Yeah, I think I would have, well, if I think generally what I would have wanted to see and hear is I would have wanted students to turn and talk. I would have wanted opportunities for students to share in the whole group their ideas. I wouldn't have wanted it to focus too much of the time of our time in the read aloud on that pre-reading discussion. So it would probably have been fairly brief, but it would have provided opportunities for all students to share with each other. So that's generally what I would have hoped to see and hear. But then specifically related to that question, I would have hoped to see and hear students talk about connections. I think mostly what I likely would have heard is connections to school. I think students would have talked about learning something in school. I think that this text then would expand their idea of learning too, because I think being it was a school-based discussion of a read aloud in a classroom, their connections likely would have been to school. And then I would have been able to then setting up this book based on what I saw and heard, I would have been able to say, that in this book, CJ learns outside of school from his family. And so I may have then asked students, I could have, depending on timing, I could have asked students to think about things that they learned from their family or in church or in their neighborhood and community. So I could have gotten them there based on what I saw and heard, but it also would depend on how much time I would have had, and I might have had to make decisions about whether that was the best use of our limited time for this read aloud, and if I wanted to save that time for the post-reading discussion. But I would have probably had those thoughts in my head heading into it and then made those decisions flexibly.
Yeah. There's so much social studies opportunity with this book too. So this could just end up really helping you integrate some of the themes or units in your class, and you have another time to talk about all the way we can learn in community. Okay, one more question. So I know that you and I agree that the best laid plans for leading a group discussion don't guarantee 100% success. And you have already explored, or we have in the presentation, some of the missed opportunities that you recognized when you reflected on the post read aloud discussion. For example, addressing student number 2, that comment about CJ's bad neighborhood. So based on reflecting on those missed opportunities, among all the wonderful other things that went on, is there anything that you would do differently or add the next time you were planning to lead a group discussion? Do you think there's anything at the planning phase that might have prepared you in particular for that bad neighborhood part?
It's a really good question to think about, because we can think about the specific, what we would do in a specific instance, but the real goal for us as teachers is to think about how can we plan more generally so that we can provide students with an opportunity to think more equitably about the world and in this case, the specific text. And I think some of the things that I may think about differently in terms of planning a large group discussion about a read aloud would be ways that I could more effectively connect others' ideas and orient students to each other. So some of the way, and eliciting multiple ideas. So some of the things that were missed opportunities were times where conversations just ended instead of continuing those conversations. And so thinking about what are the steps that what are the moves I can make to continue those discussions. I think another thing I could do differently would be to anticipate student thinking before I start a reading as well. And so thinking about what are some of the times and ways that students might look at a text and assign a judgment to that text. And so, and if I can anticipate that, I might be better prepared for responding instead of just focusing on the parts that felt comfortable or easy, or just letting certain comments go. So I may in future, I might think more about what students might do. I might also focus on questions that really draw attention to equity in a more specific way. So this was a question that was really focused generally on what CJ learns, which isn't a question that's really grounded in any sort of equity. And so that in and of itself might center that as the content focus and might allow for a deeper way to address questions that students might have. And so then if we're centering that, it makes it even more of the focus, and it, as a teacher, it really requires me to engage in those discussions. And so that's a way that I could also think about planning ahead of time that could prevent some of those missed opportunities.
Yeah, you know, that's like a really helpful framework that at least in regard to anticipating student thinking, you can try to identify hotspots, and you know there are hotspots in the book, but you picked it because it's going to surface things, potential stereotypes. You can ask a question that gets in front of that hotspot, like make sure it gets discussed, and then that hotspot, I guess it's kind of recursive, but the hotspot creates a question that lets you get in front of a conversation that you want to be sure you're ready to negotiate as well as you can. But Kate, thank you so much. It was really interesting to watch the simulation and then to also hear you think aloud about how it all went down and what you'd like to do a little differently next time. So thanks for the advice.
Yep, thanks.